but they were ordered to disappear, and if they survived, to pretend it never happened. The order arrived without ceremony, folded inside a plain envelope stamped top secret, handed out in a drafty briefing room somewhere in southern England in early 1944. No insignia, no unit name, just a list of men and a warning delivered in a voice so calm it felt surgical. What you are about to do will not exist. If you speak of it, even after the war, you will be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. If asked, you were never here. The men sitting on the wooden benches, infantry, engineers, radio operators, medics, did not look at one another. Instinct told them not to. Some clenched their fists. Some swallowed hard. One laughed quietly and was immediately silent again. Among them was Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, a 26-year-old radio specialist from Ohio, already blooded in North Africa and Sicily. He had learned that when officers avoided specifics, it meant the mission was worse than usual. A colonel stepped forward. No slides. No maps on the wall. "Gentlemen," he said, "in 3 weeks Allied forces will land in France. But before that can happen, something must be done, something that cannot be traced back to us." The room seemed to narrow. Mercer felt it in his chest before he understood it with his mind. This wasn't reconnaissance. This wasn't sabotage as they knew it. This was erased. They were told the target only in fragments. A coastal installation hidden behind civilian fishing villages, a place that didn't appear on Luftwaffe maps but mattered deeply to German high command. Signals. Frequencies. A relay node tied to U-boats, coastal artillery, and early warning radar. Destroy it, they were told. Leave nothing. Leave no proof Americans were involved. And above all, leave no witnesses who could talk. The men were sworn in individually, fingerprints taken, names recorded on a separate ledger that would later vanish. Their dog tags were taken away. Uniform patches removed. Identity stripped piece by piece until they were soldiers without a country. Mercer noticed something else then, the absence of photographers. No one was documenting this. That night, Mercer wrote a letter to his sister. He burned it halfway through. 3 weeks later, under cover of a moonless sky, they crossed the channel in boats that bore no markings, engines muffled, crewed by sailors who asked no questions. The coast of France rose ahead of them, black and indifferent. When German flares suddenly lit the water, everything accelerated. Shots. Shouts in a language Mercer barely understood. They hit the shore running. What followed was chaos compressed into minutes, wire cut under fire, a sentry knife silenced before he could scream, a radio mast exploding upward in a brief white bloom that turned night into day. Mercer did his job, relaying bursts of coded transmission back to England until the final signal was sent. Then the order changed. The extraction boat never came. By dawn, half the unit was dead. The rest scattered inland, bleeding, hunted, undocumented. And somewhere behind them, buried under rubble and flame, lay a secret so volatile that even victory would not make it safe to tell. They regrouped in a forest that smelled of pine and cordite. 12 men remained out of the original 37. No officers. No chain of command. Just survivors. The Germans were already sweeping the countryside. Trucks growled along distant roads. Dogs barked. The silence between those sounds was worse. Mercer took stock with the calm that comes only after shock burns out. Ammunition was low. 1 medic had morphine. 2 men were wounded badly enough they couldn't march far. That was when the second truth of the mission became clear. There was never meant to be an extraction. The colonel's words replayed in Mercer's mind, "Cannot be traced back to us." Dead men left no trail. They moved at night, stealing food from farms, avoiding towns. A French woman pressed bread into Mercer's hands and whispered, "Americain?" He shook his head and walked away. The installation they had destroyed, they later learned, was not just a relay station. It was part of a prototype coastal defense network, early warning tied to experimental guidance systems for anti-ship rockets. Technology so advanced that if captured intact, it might shift the balance of the war. That was why the mission had to vanish. By the 4th night, the Germans caught up. It happened near a stone bridge at dawn. Machine gun fire stitched the riverbank. 2 men fell instantly. Another screamed for his mother before a bullet cut the sound off. Mercer ran until his lungs burned, then dove into freezing water and let the current take him. When he surfaced, alone and shivering, he understood something with brutal clarity. If he survived this war, he would not be allowed to remember it publicly. History would move on without them. The men who died would not have names. and the men who lived would carry a truth that could never be spoken. Mercer made it back to Allied lines 6 weeks later, skeletal and fevered, delivered by the French resistance like contraband. No parade. No debrief with maps and congratulations. Instead, a windowless room. 2 men in suits. A stack of papers. They already knew everything. He signed forms he wasn't allowed to read fully. He swore again, this time in writing, that he would never speak of the mission, not to family, not to fellow veterans, not even to historians decades later. Violation meant prison. Possibly worse. They gave him a new unit assignment on paper. His service record was altered. Medals he should have received were quietly removed before the file was sealed. When Mercer returned home in 1945, people asked him the same question they asked every veteran. What was it like? He smiled. He lied. He married. He worked. He raised children. At night, he woke sweating, hearing dogs and gunfire, and a bridge exploding into dawn. At reunions, other veterans spoke freely, Normandy, Bastogne, the Bulge. Mercer stayed quiet, nodding along, a ghost at the table. He wasn't alone. Across America and Britain, dozens of men lived the same double life. They recognized each other sometimes, not by words, but by pauses. By the way, conversations stopped short of certain dates. The war story they were forbidden to tell lived on only in fragments, nightmares, sudden silences, the way they flinched when secrecy laws were mentioned on the radio. And as decades passed, the secret hardened. Not because it was forgotten, but because it was still considered dangerous. In 1974, Mercer received a letter from the Department of Defense. It was not an apology. It was a reminder. The mission remained classified. He laughed bitterly and folded it away. By then, history books had been written. Documentaries filmed. Scholars argued over Allied intelligence successes in 1944, never knowing that one of the most critical blows had been struck by men who officially never existed. Mercer sometimes wondered if anyone would ever know. By the way, if you're clinging to this moment with me, make sure to hit subscribe, because what comes next is where the silence finally begins to crack. The first crack came in 1998. A junior archivist misfiled a box. Inside were fragments, partial rosters, shipping logs without destinations, radio traffic labeled only with a red stamp, erased. Historians noticed the anomaly. Questions were asked. And somewhere in Washington, an old general said, "Not yet." The push for declassification grew after 2000. Families wanted answers. Sons and daughters wanted to know why their fathers went quiet when certain dates came up. Mercer watched it all from a distance. He was tired now. His hands shook. His wife had passed. His children thought he was just another infantryman who'd seen too much. One night, he pulled out a notebook he'd kept hidden for 54 years. Inside were names. Not all of them. Just enough. He knew he was breaking the order. But he also knew something else. The men who died deserved more than silence. When Mercer passed away in 2006, his daughter found the notebook. She took it to a historian, and the Forbidden War story finally began to surface. When the files were partially declassified in 2010, the truth stunned even seasoned scholars. The operation had prevented a catastrophic Allied disaster. Had the installation remained active, German defenses might have detected the Normandy invasion hours earlier, long enough to alter the landing entirely. The men who destroyed it saved thousands of lives, but acknowledging that would have revealed the Allies' early access to German experimental technology, something Cold War strategists had wanted buried. So the veterans paid the price. Silence was easier than rewriting history. Their medals were never reissued. Their unit was never named. But their story was finally told. Today, a small plaque sits in a museum, vaguely worded, easily missed. It does not list names. But historians know. Families know. And now, so do we. The secret World War II war story veterans were forbidden to talk about was never about shame. It was about fear, fear of what truth might complicate. The men carried that burden alone for a lifetime. And in finally telling it, they remind us that victory often comes at a cost history is slow to admit.